What's going on, Jeromes? Our modified Q&A videos flowing throughout the week. 5 good Vikings questions. First up, Jimmy Gordon, Commissioner Jimmy Gordon. What's your biggest fear, worst case scenario for us this season, off season? E.g., we don't re-sign Kirk. Top 3 quarterbacks go 1, 2, 3 in the draft. We miss out. So we're left starting Nick Mullins or like a Gardner Minshew bridge guy. But Gardner Minshew would bring us to the promised land. But yes, I think Kirk leaving with no compensation. Yes, his voided contract does count into compensatory pick formula for 2025. But him leaving, Justin Jefferson being unhappy, the Vikings being unable or unwilling to move up into the stratosphere for a tier 1 quarterback, and either having to overdraft Nix, Penix, McCarthy at 11, or miss out on the boat completely, and like Nick Mullins is your week 1. If Nick Mullins is your week 1 starter outside of injury, I don't know, man. I don't know, but it spiraled down. It's like, hey, they don't bring back Daniil. Jefferson doesn't like the direction of the team. He sees what's going on in Detroit, Green Bay, and Chicago, and he decides to force a trade. So I think that would be the absolute nut low scenario for the Vikings, but also I don't think it's that insane if it devolved into that point. I think it actually could be a little bit realistic. But could you imagine like if Kirko leaves and Jefferson forces a trade to the Falcons? It's crazy, man. Our free hypothetically, let's say Wilfs decide to move on from Cam Cock after next season, which 3 years. I mean, 3 years is enough time for you to implement your system with your guys. I understand the competitive rebuild aspect. I understand the 13-4 wanting some more in 2022. I understand the injuries this year, but it's a results-driven league. Gotta get something done, man. Who would your choices be to replace them both? What style of GM coach do you think they should target? GM. So I have a lot of respect for Ed Dodds, assistant GM, the Colts right now. But he's being interviewed for, I believe, the Raiders and the Chargers. So he could get one of those 2 jobs. And Kwesi, I'm not giving up hope yet. Kwesi has another bite at this apple, but the whole purely analytics driven, I don't know. And maybe it does take a meat and potato football scout, traveling regional scout up to scouting director, up to director of college scouting, up to pro personnel, up to assistant GM, up to GM. Maybe that's the route that this team needs to go. But also, I mean, if the Colts let go like Chris Ballard, I have a lot of respect for Chris Ballard. I actually like Thomas Dimitroff. I know that he got a bad rap for what happened with the Falcons towards the end, but I think that there would be no shortage of GMs that would be interested in the job. Hell, could Mick Bielman come back in? Who knows? As for head coach, so we said this before. Just because you're a really good offensive play caller, just because you're a really good defensive play caller, does not mean that you have what it takes to be an NFL head coach. And Dan Campbell was never an OC. Antonio Pierce was never a DC in the NFL. Mike Tomlin had 1 year of defensive coordinator experience. John Harbaugh was a special teams coordinator. So, I mean, head coach is so different than being an offense or defensive coordinator. It's about being a leader of men. It's about managing egos. It's about managing expectations. It's about managing a locker room. It's about managing the game. Like, there's so many skills about being a head coach that does not overlap with being a good coordinator. And I think that the whole process of hiring a head coach is sort of broken. It's like, his offense is really good, so he must be a really good head coach. No, that's certainly not the case, man. But that being said, I would go all in on Mike Tomlin, because if there's another year where he's questionable and dubious with the Steelers, we will take him back. Bring back that love and Tomlin. Zach, is the success of Green Bay and Detroit season, Bears maybe drafting Caleb, putting immense pressure on the Vikings to move into the top 3 to take a Drake May or Jaden Daniels? I think yes. But also you look at the draft order where, I mean, if the Bears stick and pick, I don't see much motivation for Washington or New England to move down unless they're completely out on whoever is remaining, and they could get a haul for it. But the bright side of Green Bay and Detroit and possibly Chicago are really amping things up is that it does put pressure on the Vikings to get something done. They can't be complacent. This isn't going to be the NFC or AFC South anymore. This is going to be a division that's going to be really tough. And unless you want to be bringing up the rear in the gear with the gear every single year, so many rhymes. I mean, you got to find your guy, and you got to build yourself a damn good roster. So I think that it's sort of like when the United States and the Soviet Union were having the space race. Like if they didn't have that competition, I don't think anyone ever gets to the moon, right? If it solely is like, hey, we'll just do our best, or like there's no pressure from external forces, or you have no opponents, I mean, you're not going to get there. So, I mean, this, again, Green Bay and Detroit and possibly Chicago rising up kind of sucks, but it could be good for the Vikings in the long term. Next up, William Kemp. How much has Andre Patterson leaving affected the defense? The Vikings always had good teams when they had a good defensive line. It's big. It's massive. And Andre Patterson is one of my favorite coaches. He was here with the Vikings with John Randall, Henry Thomas, those years, and then he came back and was really instrumental in the development of guys like Everson, guys like Danielle Hunter, and certainly guys like Linval Joseph. And now, I mean, Patterson, he's been with the Giants for the last couple of years. You see what's happening with Kayvon Thibodeau. You see what's happening with Dexter Lawrence, and Dre is a major part of that. And the Vikings. So the Vikings had Chris Rumph over the last 2 years as D-line coach. But I mean, you forget Chris Rumph took a leave of absence because apparently there was some friction between him and Flores. So the Vikings had like 3/4 of this season without a defensive line coach, which is just, people overlook that. Also, Mike Smith was away from the team. So the Vikings didn't have their opening week defensive line coach or outside linebackers coach for most of it. It's ridiculous. But for me, I always thought that Andre Patterson was underrated. I think that Zimmer, instead of having the whole co-defensive coordinator positions with his kid as well as with Andre, I think that was ridiculous. I think that Patterson should have been defensive coordinator, and he should have been play calling defensive coordinator. Again, going back to, hey, just because you're good at calling plays on one side of the ball doesn't mean you should do that as head coach. Then you just turn into the DC or the OC with the challenge flag. I think that's what happened with Zimmer. And Andre Patterson, I love him. I love him, man. He's fantastic. And you have seen a significant drop-off with some of the positions with the Vikings when, Lastly, ENF, is there positions you'd rather see us hit in free agency compared to the draft? Well, cornerback. Now, I do believe in Mekhi Blackman. I think the pride of USC, fight on, is going to be good. But, Evans, he's good in spurts, but he's very inconsistent. Booth can't consistently get on the field or stay healthy. And it seems like the Vikings, ever since Xavier Rhodes, it seems like the Vikings scouting department, which is still largely intact from the Spielman to Kwesi era, has had a blind spot for corners. And their best cornerbacks have been free agent pickups. Because you look at Antoine Winfield Jr., you look at Terrence Newman, and the Vikings drafting Xavier was good for a hot second, but then you got like Trey Waynes and Josh Robinson, Mike Hughes, Jeff Gladney, rest in power, and then these last three guys. It's tough. And you look at Byron Murphy certainly has had his ups and downs his first year in purple, but he was a great signing, and he was the Vikings' best cornerback this year. And if you can get L'Jarius Sneed for $11-12 million a year, the Vikings will have that cap space. And he never underestimate, hey, that guy played well against us scouting. So not only can L'Jarius Sneed get away with defensive holding, but he doesn't have to abide by, hey, keeping your helmet on. All right. So, and also you saw what L'Jarius Sneed did to Diggs in the divisional round. So yes, I will be all in on, because I feel like with cornerback, the ones that hit free agency, there is a market inefficiency. I feel like some of the guys are underpaid and underrated. Whereas edge rusher, if one of the premium edge rushers hit the market, it's like $20-25 million. See what Daniil's going to get. And also, I think that you can draft edge rushing talent in droves. But having standalone cornerback guy where that guy can fit into a certain scheme, that he can do it at the NFL level, I think there's a huge jump from college to the pros that doesn't get talked about enough. So I think investing free agent money in a guy that you know is good, especially in a style of play that you want your defensive coordinator to employ. I mean, if Flores signs off on Snead or hell, going after Jaylon Johnson, stealing him from the Bears, a little addition by addition, yes, go for the pin there. So, yes, if you're going to spend up in free agency, spend up at cornerback. But that's it. That's 5 good Vikings questions for today. You guys are the best. You know what to do. Skull, production value.